4. And the agenda is quite simple. We need to integrate authentication. So integrate authentication using JWT, and then also authorize some requests, right? So authorize requests. So we'll see how to authorize our request and also authenticate using JWT. Cool. Can you increase your volume? See, this is going to be my volume, but someone in the last class mentioned that there is an extension in Google Chrome that you can use to increase your volume. So maybe you guys can install that, because see, this is going to be my maximum volume. I cannot go higher than this. So what was that? Volume Master Chrome extension. So just install that and see, probably that will work well, but this would be as loud as I can go. Maybe try to increase the volume on your device as well, or use headphones, earphones, right? Whatever suits you. Cool. All right then. So we'll be integrating JWT, and this is where we left things in the last class. This is our project. In here, we have the security. This is the web security config. I hope a little bit of noise that was coming is also gone now. Cool. So this is our configuration setup for now, and now we'll add the JWT setup, right? So for that, we'll have to add JWT related dependencies here. Currently, we don't have those. So if you remember from the recorded lectures, there are 3 JWT related dependencies that we need to integrate in our Spring Boot application in order for JWT to work properly. And these are those dependencies. One is coming from JWT API. This is the APIs, and these are the implementation of the APIs. And this is so that we can convert our tokens and use our tokens properly in our Java application. So just integrate these. After that, we're going to create an authentication util class, auth util, and in here we'll basically be setting up our JWT, right? So if we need JWT token, or if we want to parse the JWT token coming from users, this would be a utility class where we'll handle all that. Cool. So all this stuff is fairly simple and standard. If you have gone through those lectures, then you won't find anything out of place. Why there is JJ in JWT? I'm not sure. I think Java JWT, probably it means, right? Because JWT is for everything. JWT is just a standard, can be used with Python, can be used with JavaScript. So mostly you would see another J with all these libraries. Cool. So for first of all, we'll create a method called generate access token. So public string generate access token, and to generate the token, we'll need a user using which we can generate the access token. So let's just get a user, and this is our user. Import class from here, and in order to create your JWT token, you need a secret key as well, right? So I'm going to store a secret key here somewhere. So let's just use this JWT dot secret key, and this can be just any random string, right? Can be very huge string as well. So this is our secret key, right? And you need to make sure that your secret keys are not exposed in your code. You don't push these secret keys. At least for the production application, you should not push your production keys onto production. And all this has been explained in the new modules that were unlocked yesterday for you guys. So there's a module called production ready features, right? Or I think deployment. How do you do deployment, right? So I think it's the module 8. So there you would find how to properly specify your environment variables on prod. But for development, this is good. So we can just do @value, using which we can get the environment variable. Basically, we can inject a field from the property sources. So this is your JWT dot secret key, and this would be injected inside this private field, private final string. Let me do private final string, and then this is called JWT secret key. Let me get rid of this final, because otherwise it won't inject it here properly. I will have to initialize it first. But if we just leave it at that, then this @value annotation will try to find this secret key field from the property sources, and it will just inject that value inside this variable, so that now it is ready for us to use. So we'll be using it here only, but before that I'm going to create another method, and this is a standard method that I'm just going to put it here. It's a method that is used to convert your simple string into something called a secret key object. So for that we use an algorithm called HMAC-SHA-key. So just provide your secret key value, whatever that is, and convert it into bytes like this. And then this will convert this bytes array into something called a secret key for us. Cool. So now we'll be generating our secret key here, and then let's use return JWTs coming from JSON Web Token dot builder, and we'll provide the subject. This would be user dot username. So you can provide any kind of values, any kind of fields here. For example, I'm providing username in the subject. You can also ignore the subject, and you can provide all the other things in other claims. So for example, I can provide another claims. For example, let's say this could be, what is the user ID? So for the user ID, I can just say that user ID is this user.getID.toString. It's a good idea to convert your IDs into string whenever you are providing those inside your JWTs, instead of just providing long values here. Issued at would be right now, so we can do instant dot now. Wait a second, what does it need? It needs a date, so we can use date as well. Date dot now, or I think there's a new date. Yeah. And then expiration date, that would be new date, and then we can get the current time in milliseconds, system dot current time in milliseconds, plus that's it. So this is 1 second, right? This is 1000 milliseconds, that is 1 second. And now this is 1 minute, and now this is 10 minutes. So we are saying that our access token would be valid for 10 minutes. After that, this will get expired. So for your normal application, for example, your production application, you want to keep your access token small. I think and 10 minutes is appropriate time. 10 to 15 minutes is good enough for us. And then there should be a concept called refresh token, so that the users can refresh if the access token is expired. So that is something that we can implement if we are adding front end like that. For example, if you look at our coding shuttle application as well, there you would notice in the console logs, if you open the console logs, you would find that we are making something called an API, called a refresh access token API call, right? So the sole use of that API call is to refresh your access token whenever they get expired. And that thing happens silently behind the scene, so that you don't have to provide your password over and over again. So we can add that. So now we have the issued at, the expiration, and then we need to sign this. So we'll sign this with the secret key that we have over here, and then we'll just do compact, and that will just generate a nice JWT, right? Generate access token. After this, what we can do is go to the service, which is the auth service implementation. And in here we are currently using a dummy token, right? But now I will integrate this auth util here. So this will be auth util. Now this will be injected here. This will be injected because I have put a component here. So now a bean of this would be managed by Spring Boot only, and the bean would be injected here, auth util. And now using this auth util, we can create a token as well. So we'll do string token equals to auth dot generate access token, and in here just pass in a user. This will create the token and we can provide that token over here. So as soon as you create a user or basically sign a user up, you'll get a token right out of the box. Also, we can do the same thing inside the login flow here. So first of all, the login flow is a little bit different because here we need to first verify if the user exists or not, right? And we need to verify the credentials after that, and then we need to give the token. So all that work would be taken care of by the authentication manager. We don't have to worry about that. Let me show you how that works. So yeah, so I'm going to do authentication manager equals to authentication manager. We need to first inject authentication manager. This would be injected. Authentication manager. So wait, this is authentication gets imported from the Spring Security. So this will return us an authentication, and authentication manager dot authenticate, and here we need to provide an authentication, and this would be a username and password authentication. So new username and password authentication token. In here we need to provide the principal and the credentials. Principal is basically the username, credentials are basically the password. So in the login request we'll get both these things. So we'll do request dot username and request dot password. Now this authentication manager will authenticate as per our user detail service, right? I think we have not integrated the user detail service for now, so we'll add that shortly. So according to our user detail service, this will work. It will try to authenticate our login request, and if it has successfully authenticated, we'll get an authentication object. Otherwise, this will just simply give us a bad request exception or forbidden exception, right? But if it doesn't give us any error, then that means the user has been successfully authenticated, meaning the login request had proper credentials. So that means we are good to go, and we can give this user their token. So first of all, let's get the user from the authentication. So we can do authentication dot get principal, and we can cast this to a user. Actually, instead of using a user here, what I'm thinking of doing is, I'll probably change this later, but for now let's just keep it user here. Later on, I want to change this principal to something else, a new type of user. We'll call that JWT user, JWT principal user, or something like that. And I'll show you why. So for now, I think this will work. We can assume that we are passing a user like this, getting the authentication user, and then we can do token. So string token equals to, actually we'll get a user only from here, and that is fine because this is coming from our authentication manager, right? So this is coming from authentication manager. Authentication manager will authenticate the request, and it will give us a user detail implementation, and our user will soon implement user details, so that is fine. So I think this will give us user only. Cool. So now we'll just create a token like this, right? So auth.generate token, pass in a user here, and once we have a token, you want to return an auth response, so we can just do this, return new auth response, pass in the token, and also pass in the user response. Cool. But now before we can hit our login endpoint, we have to fix the setup for our user and user detail service. For now it is not implemented, right? So if you remember from the Spring Security lectures, what happens in an authentication scenario is that all the requests come from the dispatcher servlet. They go through via the security filter chain, and from the security filter chain, they go to the authentication manager. Authentication manager then tries to authenticate the request based upon different type of providers that we have. One of that is called DAO provider, right? And that will basically help us to authenticate this request because that supports username and password based authentication. So for that to work, for the DAO authentication provider to work, we need to provide two things. We need to provide the user details service and also the password encoder. Currently, we are providing an implementation of password encoder. If you remember from the last class, for example, this is our password encoder bean. So this is set up, but we still need to provide the user details service, right? So for that, we need to create a user details service. So see, there is a class called user service, and we can use this only, right? We can implement a user details service here, user details service like this. Just implement the method, and it has one method called load user by username, right? It needs to load the user by username. Because see that provider, DAO authentication provider, will try to load a user by username, right? So it already has a username coming from the login request, right? So it will try to get the user from the user details service. Now user details service can get the user from anywhere, can get the user from the in-memory user, or maybe make a database call to get the user. Right now we want to make a database call to get the user. So we want to get a user, but our user is called user, right? The user entity is user, but this needs a user details. So for this to work, we need to convert our user to user details, or maybe some other object we need to convert that to user details. I'm going to convert my user entity to user details only. So just come here, do implements user details, implement the method, and we need to just implement this get authorities method, right? Because the other methods called get username and get password would be implemented by this getter only. Since we have this getter, so therefore the get username and get password methods are already implemented, and therefore we only need to override this one method. And since we are not storing any kind of roles here, our roles are actually stored in the project member. If you remember, in the project member, we have a project role. So we don't have to worry about roles at this level. On the authentication level, we don't have to worry about roles. So we can just leave this implementation as it is. And from here, we can just return a user. So just do a required args constructor, and let's do at the field defaults, make final, and level is private. And in here we need a user repository. This will help us to fetch the user via the username. So we'll do user repository dot find by username, and just provide this username, and or else simply do or we can just throw, or else throw, and that would be better, or else throw. New resource not found exception, or we can do username not found exception. This is coming from Spring Security, so we can use that as well. And then we'll need to further handle this exception in our exception handler. So either you do this or do this, both of these are the same. So I'm going to do the resource name is user, and the resource ID would be this username, and that is good enough. Cool. Auth service implementation. So now you see we are able to do this. We are able to cast this into a user, because this get principal here will return us this user only, right? Returns an object, and that is basically a user, because our user details is a user. That's why. Cool. So now let's try to do a login request and see if we are able to do proper login or not, and are we able to get a JW token. So for this, we'll just run this application. Oh, so we need to provide an authentication manager bean. So we'll do that. Any questions so far, guys? Let me just look at the doubt. Is it important to use claims? So see, we want to provide the information which can remain public, and which actually help us to identify each user. So we'll provide the username and user ID, these two things. So you can provide claims. Claims are basically called key value pairs in the JW token, right? So if you simply copy and paste this token into the jwt.io website, you would find that these claims are called just key value pairs. So we want to provide all the fields that help us identify each user. Do we send the JWT token back to front end application, or we store it somewhere else, right? So what we want to do is the access token, we want to send these token back to the front end, and it's the duty of front end to store these tokens somewhere safe. Most probably you would send these tokens, most of the times I have seen people sending the token in cookies as well, but you can also send this token normally, and the front end will then store this token in the local storage. So it's up to the front end how it wants to handle things. Do we need to send this encoded password in the username password authentication token username password? Do we need to send the encoded password? No, we should not do that. We should not pass the encoded password, because that implementation will be taken care by the authentication manager on our behalf, right? So it will automatically see our password, and it will encode it using the password encoder that we have provided. And also it will fetch the encoded password from the database, and it will try to match these two passwords, right? So if the encoded version of these two passwords match, then that means the password are equal, password are a match. Otherwise it will just give us an error that the passwords do not match, right? So we provide a valid password, we don't encode it. The encoding would be done by the authentication manager only. Could we please explain the code once again? What have we done? Sure, I'll do that. Is it safe to store it in local storage? See, there are certain pros and cons of all these things, like what is safe, what is not safe. Most of the time, I have seen that if you pass the tokens in cookies, which is HTTP only cookie and secure cookies, right? So there are two concepts called HTTP only and secure. Then your tokens are safe. Otherwise, your tokens could be used or could be fetched via the cross-site scripting attack, right? XSS attack. So if you pass your tokens via via the cookies, which are safe cookies and HTTP only cookies, then you are safe to some extent. See, if your users want to share cookies, then you can't do anything, right? You want to secure your users from attackers. So in that case, passing the tokens via cookies is a safe bet. Can we save this in GitHub Action so that it can be used? Yeah, sure. So in GitHub Action, if you want to go with GitHub Action, we have a really nice tutorial on GitHub Action as well. I think we have used GitHub Actions in the deployment somewhere. I think in microservice deployment, we have used GitHub Actions somewhere. So you can use that. And you can learn from there. Baki deployment, either via GitHub Actions or you're using code build, more or less the things remain the same only. So I will explain everything once again, like what is happening. But before that, let's just provide this authentication manager bean, because this is not yet provided. So for this, I'll just come to the web security config here, and I'll create a bean of it @ bean public authentication manager and then authentication manager. We'll need to pass in the authentication configuration, return authentication configuration dot get authentication manager, and this will give us the default authentication manager which we can use. We are not modifying its behavior, so it will just work as normal authentication manager, right? Cool. So let's run this again. Let me just run this once again. Now it is working. So now let's open this. Let's first see if we have something in the database or no, right? So I'm going to close all these things, open the test DB here, tables, users, hit refresh. So yeah, we have a user and this is the password. I think we stored this in the last class only. The user ID is 1. So let me try to do a login request with this user. So when we signed up, we used the email ID anuj@gmail.com and password was simple password, right? So let's use that only and see if this works. And yes, we are able to get a token back, right? We can just copy this token and try to see if this is a valid token. So just go to jwt.io website. And in here, just provide the password or the token. And you can see that in the subject, we are getting the email, which is basically the username. And this is the claim that we added, right? The claim called user ID. Similar to this claim, you can pass on multiple claims as well. For example, you can pass on user roles or maybe an array of roles you can provide. And if there is some other useful information you want to add, you can add that here. You should not provide the whole profile information here, because for that you should use your database call only. You should not provide any sensitive information, for example, password. So because this JWT is public for everyone to see, right? Anyone can see what is behind this JWT. So you want to make sure that this JWT doesn't contain any sensitive information, but good enough information for us to see that yes, this is a valid user. All right, so yes, we are able to provide our informations and we are able to get the token as well. Cool. So the tokens are coming in our login request. Now we want to authenticate our future requests, right? So all the requests for now, I think all the requests are public. Let me just see. So no auth, let's try to get a project, 404 not found. Yeah, all the requests are public, as you can see, because we are able to go to this particular route without needing to provide any authentication. We want to change that behavior. We want to make sure that only the authentication routes are public while other routes are authenticated, right? So we'll just come here. Open the web security config. This is that only. So in here, as you can see, currently all the APIs are permitted. We want to say that, okay, the authentication routes would be public. After that, any request should be authenticated. So right after this, if I try to hit the same endpoint, I will not be able to do so. I mean, I won't be able to go to this project with ID 1. And this is giving me a 403 forbidden, access to the resources prohibited, right? So you can't go to this particular route. If you want to go to this route, you have to provide the authentication token, but then we'll need to verify that authentication token. So even if I try to pass the authentication token, there is no filter in place to verify this token validity, right? We have not written any such code which takes care of this token and which verifies the validity of this token and do the further proceedings with that token. So even if I do this, it's going to give me the same 403 error because see, we have to provide a filter in the security filter chain. So for that, we'll have to add our own security filter and then we'll configure our security filter chain with that filter, right? So for this to work, I need to provide a JWT filter. Let's do JWT auth filter. And this is my JWT auth filter, right? This would be our filter extends once per request filter. Now filters are used before you even go to your dispatcher servlet. So even before the request goes to the MVC architecture, before even the request goes to the controller layer, these filters will intercept the requests, right? And then they will do their own operations here. So this is one of that filter. In each filter you need to implement this method called do filter internal, right? So all the filters in the filter chain will call this do filter internal of the next filter in the filter chain, right? So that way we'll go from each filter, right? So filter chain is basically a system design pattern only, in which you have different types of filters which are independent from each other, and all of these filters are basically doing some operation on one particular request. Kind of like decorator pattern, in which you have one object and that goes via different type of decorators, and then at the end you get one different type of object which is decorated by all the different types of fields. But the implementation is different here. In the in the security filters, these filters are independent from each other, while there some filters might be dependent on one another, and also they are only updating one object, right? So you can think of a decorator pattern as like a big ball contains smaller ball contains smaller ball, and then that way the smallest ball is being decorated as it moves out. While in filter chain you can think that there is a chain and there are multiple links, and link after link our object is going ahead. You can also get rid of one link from the chain, and then still the chain will keep on working. So that's how it works. Cool. And you can read about how these design patterns work. I mean, these are concept of system design. In your production grade applications, you might find some of the design pattern being used. Most of the time what happens in production application is that someone in your company, someone in your team has already implemented a design pattern that you would be using. So they have provided a nice abstraction layer for the junior developers, or if you are a senior developer there, then you should be aware about different types of design patterns already, because those are needed in day-to-day work. So for now I'll be just using this JWT auth filter. The responsibility of this filter is to check each request, and to find the header, to find one header in particular which is called the authorization header. From there get the token and then check the validity of the token, and then if the token is verified, then it needs to inflate something called a context holder, right? So in Spring Security we have a concept called Spring Security context holder. Once that context holder has the information about the user, like who is the current user in this particular request, then all the filters in the filter chain will simply bypass, or they don't need to authenticate the request then, right? So our JWT auth filter will also try to do the same. It will try to find the header. From the header it will get the token, then it will validate the token, and once the token is verified, it will fetch the user information. It will pass that user information into the security context holder, and then it will pass the request along in the filter chain. Cool. So let's do that here. We can log the requests. Let's put @component @slf4j. If you want to log each request, then you can do that here, because this filter will be applicable on each request. So we can just do log.info incoming request, and here we can provide the request.get request URI. So request contains all the information about the request, like the body of the request, the cookies of the request, the headers, right? So from here we'll get the header that we are interested in, but it also contains the path info. All the different types of information are present here. If you want to log all these information, send these to some other logger, you can do that. In most of the production application, you would see there is another filter just for logging purposes only, right? But we can just log all these things here as well. This will work. So after this, we'll get the request token header. So final string request header token equals to request dot get header, and we need to provide the authorization. Now this string has to be the same, right? I mean, you can make it anything. You can call it Anu's token. And as far as your front end is sending this token, your application will keep on working. But we need to follow the norms, industry norms. So this is the norm which is called authorization. And then in the authorization, it accepts or basically it expects token with the format called bearer space token. All right, so these are just industry norms that we should also follow. If request token header is null, or request token dot starts with bearer, basically if it doesn't starts with bearer, then that means something wrong is happening and we should just move along in the filter chain. We should not try to do anything. So we'll just do filter chain dot do filter. We should provide the request and the response. We have not updated the request or the response. We are simply moving along in the filter chain. After this, we should also just return. We don't have to go along in this filter chain, because see, we need this request header token, and only if the token is found, then only this JWT.filter should do anything. If the token is not found, then there is no point in going ahead. But now if the header is found, then we'll get the token from here. Token equals to request header token dot split this on the basis of bearer, bearer space, and from here we'll get the first part. So as I mentioned that this authorization header would contain a token like this. For example, suppose this is my header. This is my header. Then the value would be like this, bearer space, and then this would be our token, right? So we have already received the header token, right? This is the header token. This is the whole header, but we need this JWT from here, right? This is our JWT. This is our JWT token. So how do we get this token from this bigger string? So we first split this string on the basis of this bearer space. So what will happen is that this will split this on two strings. One is this string and another is this string, right? So now that our string is split, we want to fetch the second part. So that will come from this first index. Again, all of this has been explained in detail in your recorded lectures. So if this is not making sense, just go through those lectures and you would be able to understand everything. But now that we have this JWT token, we want to verify if this token is valid or not. How do we do that? Well, we already have this security token with us, right? And using the security token, we can verify the validity of the token, that if this token is something that we sent, right? And we can do that here in this class. So here I'm going to verify the token validity, and I will return a new object which is called JWT user principal. So this is a new DTO. You can think of it as a DTO because this is used to transfer data object among different classes, and I'm going to call it JWT user principal because I'll use this new class to store my JWT principal. Instead of using the user object, I'll use this. So this will have the user ID. This will have the user name, these two things, right? It will have the user ID and as well as the username. Simple. And now we'll return this only, public JWT user principal verify access token, and then we'll need the token, and we need to verify this token, right? So we'll check if this token is valid or not here only, and then this will give us this JWT user principal from here. So we'll first get all the claims from here. Claims equals to JWTs dot parser dot verify with this secret key dot build dot parse signed claims, and then this is the token, that we want to verify, right? So first of all, we create the parser that is coming from the library. We put in our token, which is this secret key, because using this we can verify the request. Now that we have this setup, we want to provide the token that we want to verify, and then if the token is verified at this step, then we'll get the payload from here, which is basically all the claims. Now if we are able to get the claims, then that means the token is valid. But during this step, this JWT can give us errors like maybe the token was malformed, or maybe the token has expired, right? So there could be different types of errors, or maybe this is not our token, or maybe the access to the signature is not able to verify this token. So there could be multiple types of errors, and all those errors would be thrown from here only. If none of the error is thrown, then that means we are able to successfully claim the token. And then we have all the claims that yes, this is our token only, and we only send this token to the front end, to the user, and user is giving us the correct token back. So now that we have the correct token, we are going to convert that information to something called this JWT user principal. How do we do that? Is this secret key, because using this we can verify the request. Now that we have this setup, we want to provide the token that we want to verify, and then if the token is verified at this step, then we'll get the payload from here, which is basically all the claims. Now if we are able to get the claims, then that means the token is valid. But during this step, this JWT can give us errors like maybe the token was malformed, or maybe the token has expired, right? So there could be different types of errors, or maybe this is not our token, or maybe the access to the signature is not able to verify this token. So there could be multiple types of errors, and all those errors would be thrown from here only. If none of the error is thrown, then that means we are able to successfully claim the token. And then we have all the claims that yes, this is our token only, and we only send this token to the front end, to the user, and user is giving us the correct token back. So now that we have the correct token, we are going to convert that information to something called this JWT user principal. How do we do that? Well, we have all the information. We can get the ID, long user ID. This would be equals to claims dot get the claim, which is this user ID. See, we are passing this user ID as a string only, so this will give us in string format, string.class. But then we want to convert this, right? Yeah, we want to convert this back to a long, so I'll do long dot value of, I think there is a parse long here, long dot parse long. Yes, this will just parse this into a long, and then we also have the username, so we'll do string username equals to claims dot get subject, because this was passed as a subject, right? Username was passed as subject, so we'll get that as subject only. And then we can simply return this JWT user principal, in which you can provide these two things. First is the user ID, and then is the username. So this will basically verify the validity of the access token, and then return us other JWT user principal that we can just use in our JWT auth filter. So we'll get that from here. We'll do required ask constructor. We can do private final. This is called auth util. This would be injected here. We can use it to get the JWT user principal. JWT user principal, I can just call it user only, equals to auth util dot verify access token, pass in the token, and this will verify the validity of this token, and then this will return us the user back. Now if the user is found, then we should take this user and inflate our security context holder with this, so that in this particular request session, the user object can be found from the security context holder. What is the security context holder? Basically it's a thread local object that is present throughout the life cycle of this particular session. So you can find it throughout your MVC life cycle, right? So we'll see how we can do that, but let's first inflate that so that that information can be found out in the subsequent request flow. So we'll get this user. If user is not equals to null, user is not null, and security context holder, security context, wait a second, security context holder dot get context dot get authentication. See, we need to set this authentication object only. But if this authentication object is already set, then we don't do anything, right? So we need to make sure that this authentication object is also null. Only then we want to set this request, right? We don't want to update this object with a new object, right? Because that means that in this particular session, we want to update the user, right? That's something that we don't want to do. In this particular user session request, we just want to set the requests once, right? We want to set the context holder just once. If the context holder is already set, then that means our work here is done. We don't want to do that again. So we have just checked that, and after that, we are going to set that, right? So how do we set it? We need to create a username and password authentication token, username and password authentication token. Yeah, this one, username password authentication token, or we can just do authentication token equals to new username password authentication token, in which you provide different things. For example, you need to provide the object that you want to set. That is going to be your principal. So for the principal, I'm going to provide this user only, right? This user will be my principal. And then what else? We have this credentials. So we don't want to provide any credentials for this one. And then for the authorities, I think we can either set the authorities as null, because these authorities are basically the granted authorities, right? These are going to be our roles. But since we don't store any roles here, and we don't have any support for roles at this user level, so either we can just do a new array list here, or maybe if you want to make this future proof, maybe in the future we want to have support for roles as well. So in that case, it makes more sense to provide our authentication token here. So we can do a list of I think this is called granted authority. Yeah, granted authorities, right? So maybe we can provide that here. So we'll do user dot authorities. So now we have this token, but we'll have to update the constructor here, right? I'm going to just simply do new array list here. So see, if you ever support the roles as well, so what you will do is in the claims, you would pass on the roles as well, right? You'll do claim roles, and you can easily provide roles in your JWT, right? This is not a sensitive information. You can just get the roles array from here and just provide the whole array here. And then you can get the array here and then, pass that array here. For now, we can just leave it as it is. And this roles part has already been explained to you in the recorded lecture. So if you want to ever do that, you can do that very easily. It's not like that has not been explained. For now, we'll just leave it like this. And now we are going to do security context holder dot get context dot set authentication, and in here we'll pass this authentication token. And that's what we wanted to achieve in the first place. And then we'll do filter chain dot do filter, pass in the request and pass in the response, and there you go. Now if you have gone through the recorded lectures, then you must have noticed that here in this particular step we make a DB call to get the database or to get the user from the database and see what is the user information from there, right? uh, but here we are using this JWT user principle. Now can anyone tell me why we are doing this, why we are using JWT user principle instead of a user? What is the reason that you think? Rohan UK says stateless. If security context holder is null, yeah, initially before sign up it will be null. User having a lot of other info. So see the reason, both are kind of correct, both Vishal and Rohan, but the real reason was that I wanted to avoid any unnecessary database call. So if we can, if because here we just want to get the user ID, maybe the user role, maybe the username, right? These information we don't want the avatar information or maybe the name. All these informations might not be required in most of the scenarios. In most of the API calls, you might not need all these things, right? So there doesn't make sense to make a extra database call. Now there are pros and cons of both these things, right? The pro is that you don't have to make a database call, right? That is one of the pros. But the cons could be that suppose if you have a previous JWT token, right, and the server has updated the user role, or maybe server has updated something for the user, then those information would not be present in a previous token or an expire or a old token, you can say, right? It's not expired yet, but it might be old. So that way, that is one concern, but in most of the applications, most of the use cases, that is not that big of a concern, right? So we can just leave it like this as well. We have created a JWT user principle which contains only the most required information, and that we don't have to make a database call as well, because we can completely trust this token. It's not like this token can ever be forged by someone. If we are getting this token, that means this user is present. Yeah, one more thing, maybe the user is now inactive, right? Maybe in the server we have made the user inactive, and that way, right, maybe the user was deleted or something has happened to the user after getting the token. So that is one thing that we have to look out for, but for our application, I think this will work as well. And wanted to show you some other way as well, right? Because you anyhow have a way of getting the user information and checking that yes, this is a valid user, these are the roles, because those are coming fresh from the database. But if you want to avoid that request, you can certainly do that like this. It's not like that you have to make a database call. Got it? I think this is making sense. Give me a thumbs up if that is making sense. Otherwise, if something is not making sense, just ask me in the doubts. How do we restrict the roles to URL per request? Yeah, we'll do that shortly. We'll see how to restrict certain users to access certain routes. That part comes under authorization. Currently, we are doing authentication. So we'll do the authentication first, and then authorization will follow. Sai Sriram, the question that you asked, I hope this question has been answered now. What the reason for JWT user principle? We already have user class. Yeah. So I think the question is answered. You can do both of these things. Can you once show the auth util code? Auth util code, sure. See, this is the auth util code. We have the generate access token. This is the previous one. Here we have the verify access token. We are creating this object here. Manish asks, can we have these classes in the morning? No, yeah, these classes would be held in the evening only, because see, there are people who are working, who have offices, and also this time suits the best, and this time has been announced in all the, it is announced everywhere on the website, on the launch video, everywhere. Lifetime of the user who is sent in security context, is it only once available for per context correct user? Yes, correct. So what happens is that once your request comes through your filters, it will come, right? It will be accessed via your dispatcher servlet. it will go through all the security filter chain, and then it will enter your controller layer, right? And then once your request has came and went, then all this information that is present about this context will be gone. So if you know about something called thread local, then you would know what this concept is. And thread local and creating our own security context holder is covered in future lectures as well. So in the future we'll actually see how to implement our own Spring security. So you won't ever find any issues with Spring security once you are done with this course, because we'll be implementing this ourselves once we add microservices. So in microservices, we'll create our own authentication security context holder with the help of that thread local, which contains the information about each request in each request, right? So that information would always be persisted in that request only. Once that request is gone, basically that thread is gone, the information is gone, right? So that happens. So lifetime of this user would be till that request only. That is correct. Today's session is unable to tackle, who says that? Neeraj. After completing the module 5 and 6, unable to get a single thing. After completing module 5 and 6, unable to get a single thing. I mean, this was explained in module 5 and 6 only, right? And this part right here was covered in module 5 only. So just go through module 5 once again. Probably you would be able to understand everything. But if it's not making sense right now, you can just keep watching it for now, and then complete module 5 once again, and again watch it. Again watch the recordings. Probably then it will start to make sense. But authentication part was pretty much clear in those lectures only. You need to go through security multiple times. Yes, that's what I'm saying. Can you repeat thread local? Okay, so let's learn about thread local. What happens in thread local is it's a different type of concept. So see, if you have a data that you want to persist throughout the current thread, right? While this current thread is active, you want to persist that data throughout that duration. Then you have something called thread local. Now, how are these threads coming into the picture? Where is this thread coming from? You don't have to worry about that. But your Tomcat server, what it does is it maintains a pool of threads, and for each request that comes through your Tomcat server, a new thread from that thread pool is taken, whichever is idle, that thread is picked, and then the request goes through that thread only, right? And your whole application is or your whole API is covered in that particular thread. So all the information would be for that thread only. So if you create an object of thread local, then that thread local would be persisted throughout the lifecycle of that thread, right? So if your request is taking one thread, then that thread local will contain or persist the information throughout the lifecycle of that thread. So think global informations like these, for example, your user information, right? You want to persist that user information throughout that thread. So things like these you can pass into this thread local. And not really sure, but I think this security context holder also uses that thread local only to store the information about the user in one particular request, right? So that way your thread local stores the information, and once you have once the response from the request has gone through the Tomcat server, that thread would be marked idle, and all the information would be removed from there. And then basically the idle thread is now ready to serve another request. All right, so that's how it works. And these concepts like dispatcher servlet, the Tomcat server, how to manage the different types of threads configuration, like how many threads are active, how many threads are in the pool, right? All this information would be covered later on in this course only, so don't worry about that. It's not that big of a deal. We have a dedicated module for that, which is, I think, the last module is for that only. So you would be able to learn about Tomcat server and all these things that I'm talking about in that module only. if we don't implement do filter internal, if we don't implement this, then basically our request will simply move through the filter chain. We have to configure our filter chain to accept this filter as well, right? You can understand that there is a predefined filter chain that was auto configured via the Spring Security for us, right? So there is a filter chain. It already has a lot of filters. Currently, our JWT filter is not part of that filter chain, right? We have to insert this filter into that filter chain somehow, right? And how do we do that? We have to configure that here. So we need to configure that information here. So let me show you how that works. Currently, if we don't do anything, then this filter chain would not be used, right? It's not going to be used. This method would never be called. We have to make this filter as part of the filter chain. Lucky for us, we can configure the filter chain here. So first inject it here. So we'll do private final. This is our JWT auth filter. This is our custom filter. And just like this filter, we have our different types of filters already present here in the filter chain. Again, these filter chain, filters, authentication manager, all these things are explained in great detail in different lectures of the module 5. I mean, if you go through the module 5 only once, you would be able to understand most of it. And if you go through the module 5 twice, you would be able to understand everything, right? Because filter chain is a difficult topic to understand for the first time. Because it has a lot of components, a lot of providers, a lot of configurations. So it takes time. But once you have understood, then you won't find any difficulty with this. We'll do required Ask constructor here. This is our JWT auth filter, and we can configure this here. We'll do add filter before. We want to add this filter in the filter chain. So basically there is a chain of filters. We want to insert our JWT auth filter right before the username and password authentication filter. Username authentication filter dot class. Right, so right before this filter, our JWT auth filter would be inserted. So this filter will basically update the security filter chain. Not this filter will basically update the security context holder, right? And once the security context holder is filled, all the future filters in the filter chain will simply pass along, will not do anything. And you can learn about these implementations here as well. For example, here you can see this is also a filter, and it also has a method called do filter internal somewhere, right? I mean, it extends from here. It is doing attempt authentication. Probably it implements here. Yeah, see, this is do filter. So it will first check if it requires authentication or not, and in the requires authentication only it will try to see that do we really need the authentication or not. I mean, you can learn about all of this, how it is all implemented, but this is again explained in great detail. Basically, it will check if the context holder is already filled or not. Also, the current request needs authentication right now or not. So there are multiple ways to do that. And since our Spring Security needs to configure and needs to handle different types of authentication processes, therefore there are a lot of moving parts in this. So in the first go, it might not make sense, but you have to keep reading again and again, and then it will start to make sense. Vishal says there are two things. One is filter and one is token. Can you explain those? So the token is basically used to provide the credentials, right? Username, credential, authorities. If you want to provide those things, then you use token. And the filter is basically used for doing the actual filtering. So it's basically is used to do the real authentication. So token is passed in the authentication to do the actual authentication. These are two different things. Don't get confused in those two. All right. So now that we have added this, I think now we would be able to see the filter in action. This JWT auth filter will come into action, and our request will go through this filter now. All right. So in the web security config only, you would notice that all the other requests are authenticated, right? And that is completely fine. Let me run this in debug mode, right? To run in debug mode, you have this bug kind of a button that you are not able to see currently, but there is a bug button right beside your run button. So you can just click on that, and then that way your application will run in debugger mode. So your application is running as normal only, but now you can add breakpoints at multiple places, and your application will stop there so that you can see what's happening. So I'm just going to put a breakpoint here so that we can see that yes, this filter is working. All right, so first let's try to do a get project request here. I'm not going to provide any authentication for now. Hit send, and you see that our application has come here automatically. Incoming request. Now what's going to happen here is we'll check if the authorization header is present or not, and we'll find that no, the authorization header is not present. If it was present, then we will come here. If it was not present, then we'll just return from here only. So let's click on this button, resume program, and sure enough, we were not able to find any request header token, right? This is null, as you can see. So therefore we are here and we are just moving along in the filter chain. Also, if you want to look at the filter chain, the whole filter chain is like this, which contains a lot of filters. Size is 12. See, all these are the filters. Disable encode URL filter, web async filter, JWT auth filter is right here. This is our filter that we added. Where is that username password authentication filter? Maybe it's called something else here. Or maybe it's implemented by some other filter. That's why I'm not seeing this. Chain. There are a lot of different things that we don't have to worry about here. Just that we have this filter chain, and this is our JWT auth filter, right? And this is the filter. And since we are just moving along in this filter, all the other filters will also do their job. They will try to authenticate this request, and then they will just process. And now we are getting this 403 forbidden here. So what that basically means is that we were successfully able to attach this filter to the filter chain, first of all, and we were able to intercept the request right here before moving ahead in the filter chain. Now it's our responsibility to provide the authorization header. The format should be like this only. I need to provide a space here, otherwise it will not work. Make sure there is a space after bearer. Okay, so I have provided this here only. That's fine. So you can just leave it, or you can just say that yes, this starts with bearer space. Now let's provide a token here. In the headers, we can provide the token. So just come to the headers part, and the token name is authorization, right? This is the token name. This is the header name. So authorization, and you can just choose authorization from here. The value would be like this. We have to provide bearer space and the token, right? Now we have to provide the token. So this is the token. Suppose I have provided a random token for now. Let's try to make a request once again. Again, the request comes here. We can click next. So this time we were able to get the token, and you can see that request header has a token like this, bearer space this, and now our request will come here. It will try to verify the access token, but we are going to get an error because this is not a valid token, right? So let's just next. Now that we have the JWT token, right? This is the dummy token that I provided there. Hit next, and I'm going to get an error. Let's see. It says that a deserialization exception occurred, unable to deserialize an unrecognized token. So basically the token was not recognized, which is correct. Malformed protected header JSON, right? This is a malformed JWT exception. And we need to handle this exception as well in the exception handling part only. So we'll handle this exception as well. But yeah, we need to provide a valid JWT here. How do we get a JWT? Well, for that we have to do a login. Once we do a login, um, yeah, we need to fix that. The login request should not go through this, and for that we can what we can do is we can create a string of all the public requests, and if our request path is one of those public requests, then we can simply move along. Otherwise it will try to find an authorization header there, but it will not cause us any issues. I mean, it will just simply pass along the filter chain. So even if you leave it like this, it will simply keep on working. And we have a filter, we have a token here. This is a valid token. Just copy this token, and you don't even have to copy this token because see, we have already written this script. Now what is the use of this script? Let me just tell you that. What is this script doing here? So this script is part of this Postman only. This Postman tool provides us with the functionality of providing pre-request and post-response scripts. This is a JavaScript script. Basically what it does is it tries to find values from the response. So here we want to find the token value from the response. This is basically how you can fetch the values from the response and set environment variables. So it will fetch the value from the token response, which is called token here. So first get the response, which is the whole response object. From here get the token, which is response.token, and set it to a token environment variable. So after this we'll have a token environment variable that we can use anywhere. For example, we can use it here as well. How do you use token? Well, you follow this syntax. Yes, right? So double curly braces, in between these two double curly braces, just provide the token. For this thing to work, you need to make sure that your environment is enabled. Currently you can see that my localhost environment is enabled here. You need to configure an environment. By default it is set to no environment. So just configure any one environment here. For example, I have put this localhost environment, right? So just name the environment anything. You can say it my environment or localhost or whatever, and then it will just store the token into that environment value. And now this token will keep on updating. For example, currently you can see this is CAO because this is CAO here, right? If I hit send once again, I'm to get another token. This is ZA6I, and you'll see that this token is now ZA6I. Cool, right? Any questions in this? Found it useful, or any doubts in this one? It's fine. Nice. Explain the script. Sure. Will JWT avoid SQL injection? Yes. SQL injection is completely different concept, Neeraj. I mean, you can't compare apples to oranges. You need to learn what is the difference between the two. What is JWT here to do, and what is SQL injection? First tell me what SQL injection is, then I will tell you if this solves or not. First time got to know this thing in Postman, right? This is really cool, right? So basically after this, you don't have to copy and paste token every time. You don't have to copy and paste token every time and paste that there, because this will set the environment variable inside this Postman only, so that your token is ready to use in all the subsequent requests. So now you can just use the token variable. So basically this is just a 2-line script. There is nothing much to it. You can just look at it and you would be able to understand everything clearly. Let me just zoom in. So basically we're getting the response. This PM here is Postman, right? So this PM library is auto injected in the post response. Postman.response.json, this will get the whole response, convert it into a JSON format, and then basically we have this PM postman.environment.set, and now we can create any kind of a variable here. For example, this is token, but you can call it JWT whatever, and this will set this environment variable inside this environment, and this is setting this response.token, which is this token. It will get the token value from here, it will set it here, and now you can use it anywhere like this. You can also provide it here just to bearer token, and in here you can simply provide the token. You don't have to provide the bearer string like that, like you are doing it here, right? If you provide manually, then you have to provide this, and you are getting this error as well. This is a duplicate header and will be overridden by authorization header generated by Postman. So we can get rid of this if you want, because this authorization header would now be handled by this bearer token. So both ways it will work, either provide the bearer token here or do a no auth here and provide a authorization header like this. Both things will do the same thing. To provide any kind of variable, you provide these in between two curly braces, and just like that it will work, right? I mean, I no longer have to copy and paste it. Let me just do this. Now I'm getting this TT1, and if I do get project in the token, you will see I'm getting a TT1. Right? So that basically speeds up the process, and you can flex among your friends as well. Cool. So now let's try to hit this endpoint. Send. Now we'll come here, and now we'll get the token as well. We'll verify the access token. We'll come here. So now we were able to successfully verify the token. We got the claims from here, and you can see the claims are coming. There is a subject, there is the user ID, there is issued at, and there is expired at. So using this information, we'll create this JWT user principal. We didn't have to make any database call as well. And now we are able to do this 404, right? Because project doesn't exist, but that's completely fine. So now our request proceeded as usual. So that's how you do authentication, people, right? That's how you do authentication. That's how you authenticate all your future requests. This is your authentication only. We have not covered authorization so far. Can we paste the entire token into the header? Yeah. See, that's what I'm doing here, right? Bearer space, this is my token. So this variable will basically be replaced by this value only. Can we make a global environment variable also and configure the token there? Yes, you can do that. This is basically a global environment variable only, right? I mean, in the environment here, you can set different levels in Postman. Could be based upon this particular collection, or could be based upon this project only, or could be based upon the global variable. So that's something you can implement. Neeraj says like 1 or for 1. Yeah. This is your SQL injection attack, which is correct. But see, JWT is for stateless communication, right? This will not save you from SQL attacks, SQL injection. This is just for authentication purposes. Now, if you are doing SQL queries and you are taking user inputs, and you are using the input directly without doing any sanitization, you are not following any protocol, or you're not using any ORM layer as well, right? You are writing manual queries, then definitely you will get SQL injection attack. But in our case, we are using an ORM, right? This is called Hibernate. So Hibernate takes care of SQL injection for us. We don't have to worry about SQL injection now, because in Hibernate, the queries, even the where queries, where we pass on the user input, those are passed as variable. So if you pass your queries inputs as variable, then you are not prone to SQL injection attack, right? So even if you do that yourself, even manually, if you try to pass your variables via the $1, $2 in SQL, then also you won't get a SQL attack. So Hibernate will take care of that on our behalf. We don't have to worry about that. So that way we are safe from SQL attack. Got it? Can I assume filters as middleware? Yes. These filters are exactly middlewares only. And in Spring Boot, there are two types of middlewares. One are called interceptors, and one are called filters. Now, filters act before even going to the MVC layer. So you can understand that before even going to the MVC layer, we have filters. Filters work in a totally different domain, right? They have their own different domain, and we are not in MVC right now. We are not inside the MVC part. Because filters work directly with the Tomcat server, right? Dispatcher servlet. They work with that only. And once everything works with the dispatcher servlet, only then your request will go to the MVC part. And then inside MVC, you can define something called interceptors. Interceptors work inside MVC, and they can also be used as middleware. So if you ask me what is the difference between these two, then when should I use a filter? When should I use this interceptor? So interceptors are basically used for specific use cases, for small use cases. For example, if you want to log your request maybe, but you can also log your request in filters as well. But if you want to do something inside MVC domain, then you would use interceptors. In most of the cases, I use filters only to do different things. MVC can also be used for, I think, logging purposes for sure. You can do logging there. You can convert your request and response as well there. For example, if you want to do response transformation for some reason, then you can do that there in the MVC part in your interceptors. So yeah, these two are middlewares basically. Can we have dev and prod concept in this project? So basically you're talking about profiles, and yes, we'll do that shortly, don't worry. So that part will come when we actually deploy this application. We'll do both the development part and the production part, and we'll actually see how to deploy this in a proper manner. So that part will come soon, don't worry guys. For now, let's just move on and update our code a little bit. For example, right now our code is not that good. If you see, for example, if I do a project controller, you see I'm doing a long user ID equals to 1 here, long user ID equals to 1 here. So basically we are passing user ID like this, but now what we can do is we can simply, maybe in my auth util only, yeah, I can use this to write one function, one utility function that I can use everywhere, right? Let's see. That function will help me get the current user ID. So we'll do public long get current user ID. And we can call this function from anywhere. Our code, basically this will help us to get the current user's ID. This will get us from the authentication. So authentication equals to security context holder dot authentication get security control get context dot get authentication, right? Now if this authentication is null, or if the principal that I get from here is not authentication dot principal is not an instance of that. When we actually deploy this application, we'll do both the development part and the production part, and we'll actually see how to deploy this in a proper manner. So that part will come soon, don't worry guys. For now, let's just move on and update our code a little bit. For example, right now our code is not that good. If you see, for example, if I do a project controller, you see I'm doing a long user ID equals to 1 here, long user ID equals to 1 here. So basically we are passing user ID like this, but now what we can do is we can simply, maybe in my auth util only, yeah, I can use this to write one function, one utility function that I can use everywhere, right? Let's see. That function will help me get the current user ID. So we'll do public long get current user ID. And we can call this function from anywhere. Our code, basically this will help us to get the current user's ID. This will get us from the authentication. So authentication equals to uh, security context holder dot authentication get security control got get context dot get authentication, right? Now if this authentication is null, or if the principal that I get from here is not authentication dot principal is not an instance of that thing, that JWT user principal, JWT user principal. So if that is the case, so either if the authentication is null, or if the authentication dot get principal is not an instance of this JWT user principal, in both these cases I want to simply throw a exception, throw new authentication credential not found exception, authentication credentials not found exception. You can just say no JWT found. But if we were able to find an authentication and it should be an instance of this only, because that's how we are setting it, then we can simply return that here, return the user dot user ID, or I can call it principal, shift F and F6, principal, JWT user principal. So using this, we can get the current user ID, right? And now in our controllers, I will get rid of all these things. And you can see this is our to-do as well. Update later with real Spring Security. Now that we have added Spring Security, now we don't need this. One more thing, we can call that method from the service layer as well. So we don't even have to pass user ID like this, right? I mean, I can do this. I can do private final that auth util, and I can do long user ID equals to auth util dot get current user ID, right? And this will work. Why this works? Because we are entering the MVC layer after the filters have done their job. So filters will do their job. They will inflate that thread local security context holder, and then now we are inside the MVC layer, and now we're in the MVC layer, and therefore we have this access to the user, right? We know that this user would be present here. So we can call this method from anywhere. Even we can call this from the service layer as well, right? So it makes more sense to call it from the service layer only. So I'll just get rid of this from here. So that way our controllers also become leaner. And that's what we want. We don't want to do much operations in the controller layer. Only operations related to the request and response should be done here. All the business logic should be taken care inside the service layer only. So that will take some refactoring of the code, because that is our philosophy. So we'll have to update the code everywhere. I'll need to get rid of this user ID from all the services, and that's completely fine, right? As you progress along, you learn new things and you update your code. So now we don't pass user ID here, and we'll update our service code as well. We'll get rid of the user ID from everywhere. I can just do option shift click 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 and click. And then we'll fix it here. We don't get the user ID now here, right? We don't get the user ID here. We won't get the user ID here. And this is completely okay, guys. We are following the best practices. So now we don't have the user ID here. Then how will we get the user ID? Well, to get the user ID, you just inject the auth util. So you do auth util, and you get the user ID like this. Long user ID equals to auth util dot get current user ID. Simple. Right? Simple change, but a really good change. Oh, we have to do that here as well. कोई नहीं, let's do it here as well. All right, so user ID is gone from here, but that's fine because we can do auth util here, auth util, and get the user ID that way. And now we can be sure that yes, the user ID that we are getting like this is the user ID of the user who's currently making the API call, right? Because we have implemented Spring Security and the user ID is only inflated with the current user, always. Cool. So now, let's see if this create project is working properly or not. So we have this create project, we get the user ID. This user is basically the owner. So we'll do user owner, user repository. Now see, we already have the user information, right? We have the user ID that is coming from the token. So if we need the whole user object for some reason, for example, for this create project, we might need the whole user object. But let's see, why do we need the user object for this though? Okay, we have to provide the user owner here. So probably for this, we need the whole user object. But see, I'll tell you one more interesting thing here. When you do find by ID, you are fetching the whole user object from the database, right? But here we need this object just for this connection, right? Just for the joint column, right? We don't actually need the whole user object here. We just need that user ID. So there are two things that you can do. Either you can create the user object in which you just provide the user ID and you can just pass that user object like this. But that is a recipe for disaster. You should not do that. One thing that you can do instead of this line is I can do user owner equals to, I can get the reference. So I can do, this is your user repository dot get reference by ID and provide the user ID. Now, what will this do? This will not make a database call to the database to get the whole user object. No, it will not do that. It will simply create a Hibernate proxy object, right? And since we are using transactional here, this is transactional, right? So since we are using transactional, that proxy object will only contain the user ID. So in the future, if you ever decide to do this owner dot get authorities, or maybe you want to do owner dot get name. I mean, if you ever want to do that in this function, then sure, this proxy object will have to make a database call to get the user information because it does not have this right here. But if you don't want to get any other field, if you just want to get hold of the ID, then this will work. It will not make any other database call, guys. So there is a stark difference between these two things. This will make a database call, this will not. So how do you like this concept? Good, bad, confused? Let me know. Good. Crazy confused. Also, one is confused. So see, why do we need this owner? We need this owner because we want to provide the owner information here. And why do we want to provide this owner information? Because we want to uh, inflate that user ID field inside the project member, right? It's just required for that purpose only, right? It doesn't serve any other purpose. So do you really need the whole user object inside your memory? Do you really have to fetch the whole user object? No, right? So we have this concept of get reference by ID. What this does is it creates a Hibernate proxy object, and this will only work in a transactional context. One more thing you have to think properly before using this kind of a thing is that you have to make sure that your function is in a transitional context. If the context is lost, and if after the context is lost you want to use this, you will get an error, right? So make sure this is inside a transitional context, and since this function is inside a transitional context, this will work properly here, right? So that way you get the proxy owner. You don't make a database call to get the owner. You just provide it here, you plug it here, and there you go, right? You don't have to do anything else after that. Or if this is not making sense, then simply use this as well. This will also work. But let's see, do we need a user object anywhere else? So we need a user ID. Yeah, so see, most of the time we only need user ID. We don't need user object, right? So there was no point of getting the whole user object from the database inside the auth filter as well. So that's why I decided to remove that database call altogether. If some controller wants the database wants a whole user object for some reason, then they can simply do a user repository find by ID call then, right? But if you don't need it, and for most of the part you don't need it for authentication purposes at least, you don't need the whole user object. So that way you are good to go without even making the database call in all the requests. Also, I mean, now I'm stretching it a little bit far, but what you can also do is you can implement Redis here. You'll learn about caching and cachables in future. But if you see that some API calls are made again and again, some database calls are made again and again. For example, find user by ID is made again and again, or find user by username is made again and again. So that particular request can be cached in Redis so that you are not hitting database for all these calls. So these are something that are used in production. We'll also use Redis in the future lectures. So that's completely fine. Just wanted to put it out there. All right, so this is file project controller. This is file controller. Project service implementation, we get the user object. Okay, so just wanted to check if everything is working properly or not before moving forward. So we are getting the user, we are creating the project, so that's fine. To get the user project, we get the user, and then we find by the user, that's fine. Get project by ID, and then do this, that's fine. Update project, that's fine. Soft delete, that's fine. One thing I want to update here is this find all accessible by user. So see, we have a concept of user member. Should we use Redis? Yes, we'll use Redis. Using Redis will make our server stateful, right? Not necessarily. I mean, it depends how you want to use Redis. How do you want to use Redis? You can also say that using database makes our server stateful or stateless. But Redis, how do you want to use this? You want to store certain requests. You want to store certain responses of database call, or maybe some API calls you want to store. Then for those things, Redis is completely fine. It actually helps save a lot of database calls. There are many times where each user is making the same database call to the backend, right? Every request is making the same database call to the backend for some reason. Maybe you are getting all the permissions of all the permissions that you have stored in your system, right? For example, suppose you have created your this lovable clone, right? Or don't think about lovable clone. Let's think about the AWS. Let's think about like we are creating AWS, for example, right? In there, for each API call, you have to fetch all the permissions of this particular account, right? So you are making that call to fetch all the permissions in each API call, right? So instead of doing that, what you can do is you can store that user permissions in a particular cache somewhere, maybe, right? So that you don't make that API call over and over again. So things like these can be easily removed, and you save a lot on the database connections, database calls. So that way your database connections go down, that way your queries go down, that way your database server is very, very happy, that way your users are also very happy. Ankit Raut says, can you explain the purpose of Redis? See, you will learn about Redis when we get to that part. It's actually explained in its dedicated module. That part will be unlocked soon. We have a module called caching and transaction management. So there you'll learn about Redis. It's basically service used for doing your caching, but it can also be used for different other things. Mostly people use it for caching because it's a in-memory database kind of a thing. It's a key value pair that is stored inside in memory only, right? Uses a single thread. You can learn all about Redis when you get to that part. So it's basically, you can think of it as a very fast database. It is considered to be doing all the get operation in O of 1. So that way it is very, very fast memory, and therefore it is mostly used for caching purposes. Yeah, I wanted to update this as well here. Why? Because see, we have a concept of project member in this one, right? You can be a member of one project. You can be owner of one project. You can be an editor of another project. You can be a viewer of another project. So when you do find all accessible by user, you basically want to find all the projects of which you can access, basically, right? So currently what we are doing here is select P from project P where deleted at is null, order by P dot updated at descending. So basically we are getting all the projects for any user, right? So this will basically give us all the projects that are present in our system. So we'll need to get rid of this, right? So earlier at least there was one check which was for the owner ID, but now we have removed the concept of owner altogether, right? Because now we have a concept of project member. So for this we'll have to update this query a little bit, and it's not that hard to understand. It's simple SQL only. So select P from project P where P dot deleted at is null, order by, this order by will come later, where P dot deleted at is null and exists select. Now you can select some particular column from here, but actually it doesn't need any column because this is exists. So if there is this is exists, then we actually don't want to do anything with those columns. We just want to see that does this column even exist or not, and if this column exists, then that's completely fine for us. So we are simply going to return a static constant thing, which is, let's say, 1. Select 1 from project member PM, where PM dot ID dot user ID equals to this user ID and PM dot ID dot project ID is equals to this particular project. So this is P dot ID, and then we can do order if you want. So what's happening here? What have you written here, bhaiya? What is this? Doesn't make sense. So now I would like to stress upon this, like what's happening here. So see, earlier we were just fetching all the projects in our system. So if we have hundreds of projects created by different, let's say 50 users, and we didn't have this particular and exist line. So basically what that was doing was fetching all the projects that we have in our system for all the users, something we don't want, right? Otherwise everyone will have access to all the projects. Instead, what we want is we want to allow each user to only view their own projects. So basically the projects that of which they are a member, right? Of which they are a member. So for that we have this and exist line here. What this line will do is it will check for each particular project. So this basically goes through each project, and we want to see that for each project, is this current user a member of this project or not, right? If this user is a member of this project or not. So we are going through each project. For each project we are checking just make this query, right? Go through all the project member tables. So we have a project member, right? If you remember, we have a project member table, this one. So go through each project members, right? And try to find one pair in which the project ID is the current project that we are looking at, and the user ID is this current user. And if you found that, then that means that the current project that we are looking at right now is this user's project, right? Or basically this user is a member of this particular project. So therefore this and exists. And we just have to see that if this user is a member or not, right? We don't have to get any particular column from here. Like, I mean, I can get a project member dot something from your pm dot user ID or pm dot ID from here. But see, it is not necessary because this is and exists. Exists calls are basically there to just check if this column exists here or not. I mean, if we are getting any response from this subquery or not. And if we are getting any response from subquery, then that works. So we can simply return a 1 from here, so that our query becomes a little bit optimized. So yeah, I hope this query is now making sense. If anyone has any questions for this query, just let me know. Query making sense or no? See, now we have a concept of project member. Let me repeat this once again. We have removed the ownership column from the projects. Now user can be a member of projects, right? User can be the owner of the project, can be the editor of the project, can be the viewer of the project. And we wanted to fetch all the projects that are accessible by the user. So for that, we want to go to the project member table, and we want to fetch this particular for each project. I mean, we are going through each project, right? In the project table, we are going through each project. Suppose we have 100 projects, then we will go to the first project number 1. We go to the project number 1, and we check in the project member table that do we have a project member in which the project ID is 1 and the user ID is this current user ID. If we have, then that means this project number 1, this user is a member of this project number 1. If we don't find in this AND clause, then we'll simply move on to the next project in that project table. We'll go to the project number 2, and then we'll do the same thing there as well. We'll check if this project number 2 and this user ID, we find a match for this. And don't worry about this query. Like, you might think that, hey, yeah, this seems like a n cross m query, right? This seems like a very big query. I mean, taking big O of n square. It's not going to be like that, because this query, you can think of it like big O of 1 only. This is super fast. This is searching inside the primary key only. User ID, project ID, we already have index for this project. So this is super fast. So we are basically going through each project only. Cool. Making sense? Making sense, perfect. Aman says, can we do inner join fetch? Yes, we can do inner join fetch as well. But what that inner join fetch will do is it will fetch the product manager again, right? So it will do the fetching of the project manager table, and then will map accordingly. So that will also work, but this and exists doesn't fetch anything. It just checks that do we have that even one row in the database or not. And if we do, don't fetch us anything, because we don't need anything from the project member table. We just want to know that if this user is a member of this project or not. That's it. Later on in the future, if we want some other information from the project member table, for example, what is the project user role, or maybe when was this user invited, or when this user accepted, or other information like that, then maybe we can fetch the whole information from project member. Right now we don't need anything. We just want to check if this user is a member or not, so that we can give this list. All right. Similarly, we need to update this as well. Currently this is doing a where clause where p.id is project id. What is this? Find accessible project by id. So okay, so this is basically finding the project by id. Excuse me. So basically we are finding the project by id, right? But before getting the project by id, we need to check that if you are allowed to access that project or not. Currently anyone can come and just provide us any project id and say that, hey, give me that project id, right? Doesn't make sense, right? You can't just come to my database and ask for any other user's project id, right? We need to first check your authenticity. We need to first check that are you a member of that project or no, and only if we verify that yes, you are a member of this project, only then we will give you that project. Now to do that, there are two ways to do this. One way is a simple and beginner way, but that is not very optimized way, right? Beginners, what they tend to do is they first do a database call just to check if this user is a project member. If this user actually owns this project or not, right? So they will do that in the controller layer. So they will first make a database call in the controller layer and they will check, okay, if this user is a member of this project or not. And only if this user is a member of the project, only then make a database call to get the project, right? So that is a valid way, but as I mentioned, this is a beginner way. What we can also do here is that we can just make one database call. In that database call, we can check that is the user who's trying to fetch this project a member of this project or not. So we can do both these things in just one go and don't have to worry about anything. So we already have this project ID check here, and deleted at check should be there always, and we can do and exists. And all we have to do is just copy this and paste it here. Select one from project member PM where pm.id.user.id is equals to this user ID and pm.id.project.id is this project ID, this project ID. Right, so for this particular project, if this exists, only then give them this project, otherwise don't give them this project. Otherwise this will be optional project, and optional can be null as well, right? So in that case, we'll simply return a null. Also, when we touch the authorization part, I think we won't be able to touch the authorization in today's class, but that's completely fine. Let's take things slow so that everyone is able to understand everything. When we touch the authorization part, there we'll see how can we avoid going to this particular call altogether if the user doesn't own the project. So that part comes under authorization. Currently, what we have done here is we have achieved authentication at the database layer. But our controller should also be doing some things, right? Controller should also be managing the authorization for us. It should be checking that is this user even allowed to make this database call, right? Is this user even allowed to view this project, or is this user even allowed to get or update or delete this project, right? So that part comes under authorization. So since we are following best practices everywhere, we should try to follow this best practices only. So here we have done this, but even if we had not done this, we would be putting that authorization check in the controller layer as well. So that part will come later when we touch upon authorization. But I think this is it for today's class. We have touched upon a lot of different concepts. We covered a lot of different things. We have completed the authentication part at least. So our requests are authenticated, but we have to take care of authorization next. For example, if anyone wants to update the project or delete the project, for example, there are multiple APIs, right? There is a get project by ID or create project. Before even going inside the service layer, now suppose you were authenticated, you were able to go inside the controller layer because you are authenticated. But before even going inside my service layer, I want to check if you are really allowed to get this project or not, right? This is get user project by ID. But are you really allowed to get this project? For that, I have to make a database call and I have to do some checking. Only then I would allow you to go into this particular database, go into this service layer, right? So that part will come later when we touch upon authorization. We'll learn about authorization using security methods. So as I mentioned, you need to learn about authorization and you need to learn about security methods. That is covered in module 6 only. So module 5 part is done. Now you need to cover module 6, and in the module 6 you need to cover the authorization part, which are lectures 6.4, 6.5, 6.6. These are the three lectures that I told you that you need to cover in the last class as well, but we did not touch upon these concepts due to some time constraint and I wanted to take things slow. So that's completely fine. Just learn about these three things before come in the next class, because we'll learn about these things. We'll understand authorization, and then we'll move ahead in this course as well, right? We'll implement some more things in our lovable clone, and then will come the AI part, which is the cool part. So AI part will come after that. But I think this is for it for today's class. Enough. Any questions? Is there any tool where you can pass SQL query and it can convert to JPQL? That tool is called ChatGPT, in where you can provide anything and it can convert to anything. Any other question? When are we going to integrate the logging? It will help debugging in better. A project is getting bigger. Suman has a really good point, guys. We should start adding logging here. So probably from the next class onward, I'll start adding logs in each service layer, right? So for example, here we can add one log, here we can add one log, even before returning we can add one log. So logging is really good, and we'll start adding logs, Suman, don't worry. Kartikeya says, since we are getting user ID from security context at multiple places and passing it to the parameter at different method, we can create a utility method to do so. We have already done that, right? Did you ask this question after I added the utility method? This is that utility method. Can we give a break next week to cope up? Priyanka. You guys are going to have a week break after this week. Okay, so there are a lot of people, so I can just take a quick poll. Do you need a week break next week, or do you want next week? Because see, I have to give you a next week break, because that I have already promised, and I also have some personal commitments. So I need to be away for those 2 days. So that's why those breaks were given. But what I can do is okay, let's do this. I will not unlock the future lectures, future modules for the next week, but we'll have the live classes. All right. Next week, guys, I've already given you that 1 month notice, right? I think on 1st or 2nd December, I told everyone that yes, we won't have any live classes on 28, 29 December. So yeah, we will not have live classes on 28, 29 December. But what I will do is I won't unlock any lectures on 20th, if that works. Unlock the AI. Yes, we want that. So there are people who want AI wala part. Okay, so we'll unlock. Okay. And we'll also have our live class then. Maybe we can have just the one live class next week instead of 2, just to cope up, and then the other class could be just for doubts. We are very flexible that way, guys, don't worry. Cool. So in the next class, which is next Saturday, I think it's 20th. Yeah, on 20th, we'll be learning about authorization part. We'll be covering security methods and all that. And then we'll maybe have a break of that one class. That's completely fine. One live class. Okay, we'll do that. But still, just complete until module 5, guys. Complete those 3 lectures before you come into the next live class. Only then you would be able to understand about the authorization part. Although I would try to keep things as simple as possible, but still it's generally better to come prepared in the live classes so that you are able to absorb more. Cool then. I'll see you in the next live class. Shivam says Saturday break, Sunday we can have class. Actually, I'll take a quick poll on the Discord only so that more and more people can participate in the poll. As we are in a cohort based course, so we have to go with the majority. So whatever majority says goes. Cool then. I'll see you in the next live class, guys. Take care. Bye-bye. Good night.